Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. First, why don't I just give a quick introduction to both Rahul and Nikhil? Rahul was the founder of one of, I think, the very early AI first software companies, which was a company named Simility. Rahul, that was almost a decade back, right? In 2014, I think, is when you guys had started the business. Simility was in the fraud detection space and was a company that was ultimately sold to PayPal, where Rahul then spent a few more years. And now Rahul is on his second gig as, again, building another AI software company, which is a company called RapidCanvas, and where the idea is to help increase AI adoption across several targeted use cases. So, first, thank you so much, Rahul, for joining the call. And Nikhil is a founder of a company called LimeChat. They also happen to be a company in our portfolio and a company that we are very excited about. LimeChat uses conversational intelligence to help brands essentially drive better outcomes on both support as well as sales. Nikhil spent a lot of time doing research on AI at IIT Delhi before ultimately starting now a company on this side, and at least would love to get your views on how do things change when you're doing research versus when you're convincing people that, hey, look, here's an AI tool, it might do something else, but please buy it. But we'll get to that in a minute. This topic was something that was suggested to us, which was because AI is, non-deterministic, right? It often causes friction when you are selling to customers, because customers are very used to buying traditional software where, look, if input is X, output is Y, there is no, or ideally there should be no variation unless you have bugs between the input and the output. And now suddenly when you have software which may not always give you the same output for the same input, also integrates far more deeply with your data stacks, it does cause some jitters in the process when you're selling to them. And the idea was to discuss, how do you make this process smoother and, hopefully drive better outcomes for both yourself as well as your customers. So with that out of the way, and maybe Rahul, I'll just start with you first. In some sense, you have now seen this arc over a longer period of time, from Simility to then also seeing this internally within PayPal, and now that you're building RapidCanvas. Just would love to get your thoughts on, in some sense, what are the key differences as you start doing customer onboarding for AI first software?
So, let me probably state some of the things that, sort of become hurdles or challenges, right? When you're trying to onboard customers onto AI first software. And then in the context of that, we can talk about the differences because of the evolution and also how it is different in like a ecosystem company like PayPal versus if you're a startup. So Simility, I would say, probably early days of AI ML platforms, almost everything was a hurdle, right? Right from getting data from the customer to convincing someone that this is not kind of black magic. It's like, this really happens, it's possible. Do a POV, do a POC. I still don't believe you. All of these things. I need to give you a blind data set, right? So in the early days, a lot of it was about, okay, can we get this done? Is it possible to solve this problem with AI? And then getting you my data. Those were sort of major challenges.
Mm-hmm.
They still remain, but a lot has changed, right? So for example, now you have almost if you use tools like Fivetran or like native connectors, almost every platform now has pre-configured connections into any data sets or third-party apps. So for the customer, it's easy because they're like, okay, I have these 5 apps, and we're like, okay, we have predefined connectivity into those. So life is easy for them. There is fair bit of information out there on how to solve particular problems with AI. So people kind of educate themselves, and they're not coming to this completely clueless. And then you have to convince them. They're sort of convinced. They're just trying to then poke and validate whether what you're talking makes sense, whether you're a trusted, whether you're actually capable, they can trust you, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, things have evolved. Of course, it also means like it's gotten much more competitive, right? Because now anybody can build an AI company, which was probably harder before. So you had few players. Now it's a lot of players. So the challenge is more like standing out from everybody else, and making it easy to start using you is one of the ways that you can make it valuable for the customer, right? And this is what we try to do with RapidCanvas. Like we try to auto configure, pre-configure as many different permutation combinations as possible, so you can see quick time to value. Like people want to see, like they don't want to see, they want to show somebody else, look what I did, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can get them it doesn't have to be perfect, but something quickly that they can turn on, like, oh, this is awesome, right? And I can share this with somebody else in the organization, and start the process of figuring out the ROI and budget and all of that. That is very, very helpful. And then along the way, I would say like PayPal was an interesting journey, because at PayPal, we were part of an ecosystem. So if you're a merchant, we already had your data. We already ran the risk models on it. And we could actually show the customer, you don't need to give us data, you don't need to integrate, you don't need to do a contract. And by the way, here is a one pager that shows what is your current fraud rate. And if you click this green button, what will it be? They're always almost like, where do I sign, right? That's the most frictionless onboarding that you can have, which was like a phenomenal, right? We went from like a few tens of customers as similarity to at PayPal, like 30,000 plus. But all of that was because the entire friction of onboarding was gone, right? So I could see the both extremes in that whole journey, and everything in between. But yeah, interesting perspectives when you look at it from big company versus small, 10 years ago versus now, and you can see all these perspectives very clearly.
Nikhil, any differences of opinion? Anything you want to add to that one?
And actually, also, Nikhil, as you give your perspective, given that there is a lag between when Rahul started
exactly
versus when you started, that lag also impacting the mindset of the customers in terms of believability of AI. So has that barrier gone down purely from a acceptance perspective of AI also?
I would say till a couple of years ago, maybe in 2019, 2020, the acceptance of AI was very nascent, at least what we saw around us. And we're talking about the acceptance of good AI. So there was a class, like generations of AI are being built almost every 4 or 5 years, something new comes, like we saw with ChatGPT as well. So I think the acceptance of AI and the use cases of AI have definitely exploded over the last couple of years. People know what it is. It's not just a research topic in labs anymore. It's being used for applied applications. So I think that's something that appealed to a lot of young people, including me. I would put myself into that bucket, where I felt like AI is not just something that you can research about. It's something that you can bring to life. It's something that can actually solve real world use cases. And just to add to Rahul's point, how do you think about setting up or helping people get onboarded onto AI? I think it's about, first of all, it's a very generic term. You understand, it's a very, very generic term. It's almost like saying, like, you have a coding language like Python. How can you get people to adopt Python? It depends on so many different type of use cases. Now, in most enterprise businesses, they would look at using AI to help, speeding up a process, or there's some kind of outcome associated with it. There's some which are not so outcome oriented. It's more about the look and feel. So like, okay, were they able to complete a task using AI, and it's qualitatively, it feels better. As compared to some cases, like in our case, for example, we have a very predefined output, an outcome metric that we have to kind of hit with our AI for people to start, accepting it. So when we started, for example, the expectation of automation through AI, for example, in the support use case, that's where we work, that was somewhere around 30-40%. So that means it was considered good, that if your AI can solve maybe 30-40% of the use cases or the queries, that's considered good AI. We try to push the boundaries from day one. We said that we're going to give you 70% hands down. So that's what got people excited. Okay, you can if you can do 70%, we're very happy with that. But can you do it? So there was a question mark right now on the fact, can it be possible? Now you define those very strict outcomes. Can it do sales? So my approach onto that is it's become very outcome oriented now, because AI has actually been able to, it's not just a buzzword, it's not just a vision, it's actually able to give you real world outcomes. So I think that has definitely changed. I mean, Rahul can definitely add to that, but it's becoming very day to day. It's becoming democratized. I think that's the main thing. Now you're able to actually open up ChatGPT and actually use it on a day to day basis. A lot of people are using that in place of Google search. A lot of people are using that to actually type in their content. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those use cases as we go along.
Rahul, I was just thinking about what you described about your experience, selling the Simility product as Simility and then as part of PayPal. How large an impact, if any, does brand have when you are going to market with this kind of a product? Because PayPal, I'm assuming, was a much larger entity, much more well known. So did that also play a factor where people said, hey, look, a lot of things are already taken care of?
I would say more than the brand, like captive customers was a big, like if you were a PayPal customer, you had very few choices, right? And to use some other product, you had to integrate, do another contract, make an ROI case. Here it was like everything was pre-integrated, pre-set up, performance was predetermined. And so I think that helped a lot. It's actually ironic, right? Like the way perception of big companies has changed, because like startups are so well capitalized now, and big companies are just like, oh, they move slow, they don't innovate enough, and customers are, not that hung up on saying, I will only work with a big company. What they care about is that you'll be around for a while. They're not so hung up on the fact. And so if you are quick moving, if you're innovative, they are also like, and maybe this is because most of the times we dealt with early adopters, they were like, okay, these guys will be more responsive to me. They're not going to like be slow in roadmaps and product innovation and all of that. And they're well capitalized. So they'll be around for a while, one way or another, right? Either through an acquisition or by themselves. So in that case, I never thought we had a disadvantage because we are a smaller company as a brand. But awareness has to be there, right? Like not everybody knows about you. So, building awareness is important, but it wasn't really a disadvantage once people knew about you.
Usually you do need to run pilots before customers are convinced that there is value to be derived. What are best practices for running good pilots?
And actually, if I may add to it, what are best practices to even avoid a pilot if you can?
Our whole company was pilot oriented. The first, I think, 20-30 onboardings we did, they were all based on an initial pilot. And after that, we've never done a pilot. So I can talk about both aspects, about why a pilot was needed and how do you avoid a pilot as well. So it talks about, it leads to your previous question, actually, Arpit, like the credibility. So we're promising certain things. So in the beginning, when we started, like I mentioned, we promised a certain type of outcome. Now, people had tried these outcomes in the past. Now, the thing is with AI, it's always evolving. So we were working in the chat space, chat automation space. Now, in 2018, the promises that were given around chat automation were not up to the mark as compared to what they are right now. So there was a lot of misconception that there's distrust in the market. There's so many people coming and pitching the same thing. Can someone actually deliver? I've tried. I know I personally met a couple of customers who had tried out 3 solutions before they came to us. So they were just so anxious of just finding a solution that works, they were willing to try it out. So the use case was very well capitalized. Like, okay, people knew that they want to get this outcome. So they're willing to try. But they had that fear in the back of their head that it might not work because no one had proven it so far. So, at those cases, you must start with a pilot. So we said that we kind of pitched ourselves. I mean, that's what you can do. I pitched my background. We pitched why we have something that's new. And they're like, okay, let's give it a shot. We'll give you 2 months. And in those 2 months, if we're able to hit this outcome, then we'll continue with a longer year-long contract. And so that's what we had to do in the beginning, because there was we don't have anything active. No one can actually see this live in action as well. So after we got our 20th company on board, after that, we had all these public facing kind of, systems where people can go and try it out. We don't have to it's not just a slide on a pitch deck. It's something that they can try it out themselves and they can see the magic. They can see the experience, the difference. And they're like, oh, I want that for myself. And that's it. So how do you make the things that you share with them during the time when they're asking for a pilot, saying that, why do you need a pilot? Do you want this or not? We can build the same thing for you. So then the credibility starts to build, and then we just go on that. So after that, I think after the 20 customers, we never did a pilot. There's no sense. If someone is asking for a pilot, that means they've not really captured the essence. They've not really understood what's really going on. But
And
early stages, there was no way around it.
Do people ask for other external sources of proof apart from what we are pitching, in the sense, show me case studies, connect me with 3 other customers who are happy so that I can talk to them directly? Does that happen then?
What happens is it depends on the product as well. Like our product is so demonstratable. I can share them a link and they can try it out. So whenever someone comes for the sales call, they're like, where can I try this out? Or which customer can I talk to? I just send a link right there and then. I'm like, you know what? Let's do a live user testing right here in the sales call itself. And then whatever questions they have, we're able to kind of guide them through it. And they're like, wow, this is great. Can I get this for my brand? I'm like, yes, that's perfectly right. Initially, you have nothing to demonstrate. I'll give you an example. Like you think about ChatGPT. I can keep coming back to this because it's something that's changed the way that people think about AI, right? You can just say, oh, it's great. It can actually solve use cases. But until people actually try it out, they won't feel the trust. People see and then they trust. They won't hear and they trust. So you have to figure out a way that visually they're able to kind of see things in one format or the other.
I'd love to get Rahul's views also on, again, the topic of pilots.
Yeah, I think there are some sort of qualifiers, right, for when POC or pilot is needed or not. And I can speak a lot more about the Simility experience because we have breadth of experience there. But is the product purely from you're buying the product from a capability standpoint, like, I don't know, like Salesforce or HubSpot, right? Like it's about usability, capability, features, all of that. Whereas Simility was about improving fraud outcomes. So understanding that in my world, what will the outcome look like is very important. Okay. And so people would always, because they would say, well, I already have my fraud rate like less than 2%. Mm-hmm. So to move the needle, it has to be 1%.
Yeah.
And so I need to know that that's going to happen. I'm not debating your product is great, but will it work in my case, right?
Yeah.
So that was one axis. And usually that meant if you had a greenfield situation where there was nobody, basically, if they were starting from scratch, there were no numbers to compete against. So you got in. But if they had something and they were trying to replace, then you had to prove you were better, and the ROI between the two was there because they had to justify the cost to somebody. And this typically happened largely with enterprise clients because they would have had some legacy solution which they had to rip and replace, and they had to justify everything, and all this time, they would take a year to implement and all of that, right? So in those cases, you could not avoid. It's also a question of leverage, right? Like if you're dealing with a client who's sort of mid-market or smaller, and you can have many of those clients, even you will take a strong position saying, I would want a full contract, otherwise exactly. It's not worth my time, right? Yeah. And then, to what Nikhil mentioned, we always try to go for the opt-out versus opt-in. So you will continue after 90 days unless you decide to opt out, rather than saying after 90 days, we'll look at the success and then decide to do a contract. No, you sign the actual full contract now. Let's pre-decide all the commercials and just say you have an opt-out clause, 60 days, 90 days, whatever. But with enterprise clients, that's the only way we got them to proceed. And what I would say is, like, even those guys have so much inertia, like it's hard to get them going, but once they're going, then they don't want to stop. So they will make sure the pilot works out, because like they've spent 1 year doing RFPs and another like whatever months like implementing you. They don't want to go back and start 2 years again from scratch, right? So they will just make sure it kind of inserts itself, but it's just like a checkbox for them, right? That we did the POC.
Actually, Arpit, I wanted to add in here that these kinds of problems, I think the distinction that Rahul made on knowing that this is going to work in my environment actually is both a bottleneck, but also a retention mechanism later. I mean, if I relate to sort of my days in sales, let's say I'm selling employee self-service HR. There is not much to be done. You know that you click a button, a window pops up, and you can say, I want to apply for 3 days leave beginning February 23rd. There is not a believability angle in selling that kind of a product. But you go and tell a CPG company that I'm going to do demand forecasting for you. And by the way, guess what? It's going to reduce stockouts and at the same time reduce inventory. There is just a believability challenge in those kinds of discussions. I remember trying to one of the semiconductor companies, we were trying to alter their supply chain and figuring out how many different points of inventory in their supply chain they need to have. And literally it took us a month. We almost built the entire thing before we could actually sell it to them. So the bottleneck to sales was actually very high. And at least I felt that, that the cost of sales in these kinds of situations actually goes up quite significantly. And I don't know, Rahul, in your case, you were selling to large enterprises. Do you feel that compared to building other kinds of SaaS companies, do you find like a cost of sales to be higher in an AI first company or not? And Nikhil would love to get that thought also.
Yeah, I mean, of course, enterprise, it took year and a half to close one deal. So not only is the cost of sale higher, but also you have sort of lumpy revenue behavior, right? Like something may not convert and your pipeline is not that broad, right? There are only so many people you can go after, right? So everything changes, your marketing, your, how do you project revenue and all of that. And Alok, to your point, I have a funny anecdote. When PayPal decided to sunset our original product, and it took us 3 years to get everybody off of it. We would keep saying, I'm going to take you out. Yeah. They're like, no, I'll pay you 3 times. I'm like, no, I don't want the money. So it's hard to get in, but you have a massive barrier to entry once you're in. Like nobody else can then come and dislodge you, right? It's like it's a multi-year relationship at that point in time. The switching cost is very high for people from you to somebody else.
Yeah.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Ketan.
And guys, just for everybody's benefit, Ketan was the co-founder and CEO of Mettl, which was broadly in the assessment and education space. And I know they use a lot of AI. Had a very successful exit as well. So, Ketan, thank you for joining.
So I had a quick comment. I mean, we are, so just as a quick background, we are 2009, started in 2009. So pretty old vintage, 14 years ago now. But we started using some AI in terms of auto proctoring our assessments. And it was early days, whether somebody's cheating or not, can we predict that? Can we identify that automatically while the test is on and there's no manual invigilator? And I think for the first 2 years, we almost had a crash in every assessment drive that we did. So, I mean, it was a very painful path to get to some stability in our case. And I remember we not pitching AI and all these fancy tools, so to say, to our clients. We used to go business first, that, okay, this is the business benefit that you get. And by the way, we have AI in the development stage. And if it works, it can probably be a cherry on the cake. You can probably use it at a trial in a low risk scenario sort of thing. So at least my experience, and this is kind of vintage, but was that we stopped using AI as a front end to get in, but started using business benefits. And then when it stabilized, then it was probably much easier. And as I think Nikhil pointed out, and Rahul pointed out, if it is demonstrable, it just becomes very, very easy.
It was very interesting, right? That a lot of the data that we use, which creates the value in the product, ultimately belongs to the customer. And does anything therefore changes on, IP rights in particular, and also if at all there are any implications on the pricing model, as again we are selling to these actually across the board, whether it is enterprise or whether it is small guys.
I mean, in our case, these things became very hairy. The IP clauses and everything, especially with large banks, then they would make us deploy on-premise or inside their own private cloud. So definitely the product having the capability to be isolated in their environment and our sort of willingness to, adjust to sort of their IP needs And at the same time, we had to have a lot of, what do you call it, accreditation, certifications like SOC 2, Type 2, PCI, DSS, and all of those things because we were dealing with financial data for fraud. So all of these things, right, to Alok's earlier point, I just put that as cost of sales because you're selling to these big guys, they want all these things. And so you have to do it. You have to be able to be in an isolated environment and so on and so forth. Nothing particularly to do with AI or ML, but largely because of the fact that, I mean, to your point, right? Like the difference between these kind of tools and something else is like you're ingesting customer data.
Yeah.
And so it is a massive hurdle for them to climb versus, buying Zoom or, something else, which they can start from scratch. They don't have to let anything use their data and so on. So definitely it puts a lot of extra barriers, hurdles, whether it's data privacy, GDPR, all of those things come into play.
Our case is actually quite different from what Rahul just demonstrated. For us, the actual, from the client side, there is something called client data. And as we're having maybe more conversations with their customers, that data increases. So we're collecting data over a period of time, and that's growing. And the way that the system works, the way that the AI works, is that it kind of assumes all of the data into a black box, and it's able to kind of integrate with it. So you can it's almost like floppy disks. Each company has its own floppy disk. It inserts it into the computer, and the computer works in a certain way. So kind of decouple that as much as possible. What that allows us to do is that we don't have so much interdependence on this data with our model. It's separated out, and this whole data is already owned by the customer. So the customer says, "I want to leave." They can just, the only thing we have to give to them is the data, which is basically the conversations. So we've kind of, by having the decoupling, it's never become a point of contention during the sale process as well. Nor has it really hit our pricing, because when people ask, okay, what's the IP? The IP is that we have our own magic model, and you have your data. You put them together, and we'll give you an outcome. That's it. So the only thing that you have to hold on to is the data.
Switching gears just a little bit, so far I think a lot of the conversation was around how to sell. If we just move to the next step where, look, we have customers on board, POC, non-POC, everything has happened. The lawyers are happy. At this point, from ensuring that customers are successful, and oftentimes there will be some level of change management that might also be needed because, again, the workflows are not very static when it comes to AI, right? A lot of stuff does end up getting dynamic. What are, again, any best practices? Does it make sense to have a lot of human heavy support almost as a feature as opposed to a bug, at least to start with? Or does it make sense to let customers figure it out on their own and only intervene where necessary? And again, I know because Rahul, you have a very enterprise-oriented point of view. Nikhil, I know at least you have a slightly more SMB-oriented point of view. Would just have to understand those thoughts as well.
In the Simility world, we had two product lines. One was the PayPal one, which was completely self-service, auto start. You don't even need a manual to get started. It just like ran. And we had an autopilot. It's like, if you don't even want to touch it, just see the thing work, it just works, right? And so there, absolutely zero human involvement, even for sales and so on and so forth. Whereas on the Simility side, it was very services heavy. So we need to have a project manager and a data scientist and a data engineer. I mean, of course, we got compensated for all of that, but those deals, when they become that big, you have a team. And when they become multi-million-dollar, of course, like it's quite a unit that is almost dedicated to a customer. So definitely the expectation on the customer side in the enterprise is that there will be services. And if your buyer is kind of not the data horizontal or the technology horizontal, but more like the vertical buyer, the business buyer, then even more so, because they don't have even the capability. Forget, just because they're paying you, they expect it. It's not even that. Like they just don't know, right? They're just looking at business outcomes, and they're expecting everything to be sort of like taken care of by you. And they are bespoke because they're so big. So they have very many nuances and quirks about everything, data, integrations, all of that.
From our perspective, from the SMB space or mid to large market clients, the process for us is that we've just broken down this entire touch point with the customer into two different teams. There's an onboarding team, and then there's a success team. And these teams are very important for us because They're the ones that are actually trying to produce the outcome. And there's a trust from the client on our side that will take care of it. We know how the AI works. We know how the models work. So the first team that comes to the picture, which is the onboarding team, their job is to ensure that the numbers promised in sales are met. So it will stay with the onboarding team until that outcome is, it's almost like a pilot phase. You can almost think of it like this. We call it hypercare within the company, where we build it, we have all the functionality live, and then we put it for a month of testing in the real life production. And we make sure that the outcomes are being hit. Then we have a handoff with the client. Client gives a thumbs up that, hey, I'm happy. Whatever you promised, I've been able to give. And then you give it to a success team. So the onboarding team is like very, like, it's like nurturing the client a lot. That first touch point is really important. They know that we care. And in the success team, now one success manager can actually handle a lot of clients. Onboarding, not so much, because that's like a part of the process. Success is like the end goal. It just keeps adding, right? You get more and more clients getting added to one success manager. Maybe then you get more success managers. How do you make them more efficient? So by making sure that the outcomes are already reached before it reaches success, you put a lot less burden on them, and their job is to maintain and help them get better outcomes. What does happen is that once it leaves onboarding and goes to success, it's not necessary that the outcomes will be maintained over a period of time. Let's say 6 months in the future, things have changed. The data has changed. There's a lot of new things that have happened within the company itself. So the success team just has to do a maintenance job and kind of pushing the boundaries with new features. This has worked well for us, at least.
And Ketan, in your case, I would have imagined that remote proctoring is not a customer-specific implementation, or at least that's my assumption. I may be wrong totally. Would onboarding and success still be equally complicated in your case?
So there were nuances to it, Alok. I mean, the nuance was some people wanted their automatic proctoring because it was low stakes. Some people wanted their own proctors. Some people wanted our proctors to be there as well manually. So, I mean, there were nuances to it, and we had to kind of build those features on top of the base platform. But I think over time, when it stabilized, we had a lot of data. We could just do a very quick pilot and show them the benefits, show them the recording of the screen, recording of the test, and it just became, the sales process became easier. And I think over the last 3 years, that leg of the business just flew off, especially in COVID. I mean, the education leg just flew off because we had all these features and it was just ripe to go to the market.
So, and I know, Rahul, you gave the example of self-serve also, but I do have an Uber question then on this. At least in my head, I assume that when it comes to AI first apps, sometimes selling is harder. It may involve a pilot. Onboarding is harder because you're connecting to a lot of different data sources. And there might be that initial time where AI accuracy sort of ramps up to a point where it reaches that zone of acceptability. And thereafter, there might be drift in the models, whatever. I mean, just the ongoing success is harder. And if you go to sort of, and I'm using some very broad thumb rules of SaaS, which is that if, let's say, you're selling to the SMB segment and you look at the equation between CAC versus ACV, you actually expect a less than 1 year payback in an SMB segment. In enterprise, it can take longer, but then the net retention rate is actually much higher in that segment. Just given and I'm making the inherent assumption here, which is that both the CAC is high and the cost of serving is going to be high as well. By and large, and I know exceptions will exist, would you believe that AI first apps are more of a mid-market to a large enterprise play and not an SMB play?
So this is the learning that I've had throughout working with SMBs and the larger companies. Simple fact: the larger the company, the more value you're able to generate for them. There's no two ways about it. Our product is a lot more sticky. The larger the company, it's a lot more sticky. And as Rahul also mentioned, the cost of switching is just immense because you've already fine-tuned for that particular company for that particular use case. Now for them, it's like starting from scratch again. It's going to take, the ramp-up period is real, and that's scary for a lot of companies. When it comes to SMB, now what works over here is the fact that how much can you make that AI as a must-have? That becomes really important. Is it a must-have for their company now? like no matter what, like when you start off, so let's look at the first couple of SaaS apps that most companies start off with. Like they try with Google Suite, they'll put like a documentation software like Notion, they'll have a communication software like Slack, right? So this is part of the playbook. So now, can we insert AI as part of the playbook somewhere? Only then it would make sense. They would be paying a high amount of, like they'll pay a higher bar. They won't be in that, like a small ticket size kind of item or sale. They'll be willing to pay more for it. But the question is, can you insert that as part of the playbook? If until that happens, it's going to be very hard for you to sustain an SMB. The only way to make it feasible is to actually have a much higher pricing point. So what we noticed is with us in SMB, when we had started, when there was no trust in AI, our pricing was actually quite low in the early days. We didn't do any free pilots. Everything was paid, but the pricing was low. And then over a period of time, as it became a must-have in the playbook, we actually doubled our pricing and then we doubled it again. And although it was out, actually honestly, it's out of reach for most brands to actually buy it, but it has become must-have for them because it's the differentiation between their brand and the next brand. People look at that as a way of trusting that particular brand if they have a really sophisticated system. So to offset those costs, you have to just price it a lot higher. And yeah, there's a lot of caveats, I would say, in that. So you have a lot of pieces. We're still figuring out a lot of those pieces ourselves. But yeah.
The one thing I would say is like, in an ideal world, it would be ironic if humans are required to make AI work in some sense, because the AI's job is to make humans redundant in some sense. And if you need a lot of people to I guess eventually you'll get to a point, and we had sort of a small experiment at PayPal, right? Literally, we were like, SMBs, some of these folks didn't even know how bad their fraud rate was. And we said, look, we're just going to like I had pushed people so much, like, auto enable them. Don't like tell them 3 times and just turn them on because they're losing money. They shouldn't be. It's like, and the entry level product was free if you had a certain level of PayPal product. I'm like, just turn it on, like they'll benefit from it. Because the whole point of doing that at PayPal was that you could scale without throwing people at the problem. But there were so many things that had to go, like it took us 2 years to build that. After we had a product to actually make it such that it plugs into the ecosystem, it's self-service. It's not impossible, but you need to build it that way. But yeah, I would think it's possible, but you have to find a very, very fine-tuned use case that there is very little variability. You already have the data. You have done all the experimentation with that customer's data before you even touch that customer, right? From a starting the implementation standpoint. If you do all of that, then it's possible. But that's a luxury, and we had that. So we used that to the maximum.
True. See, Rahul, your case was very special, just given the access to data you already have. Yes. And I'm wondering that in situations where you need to get access to the data first, and then make AI work, while it is of value to the SMB, but just the entire process, from your perspective as a provider, is it worth it or not? And I know Ketan would love to get your thought on this as well, because you did this several years back.
So we were focused on India, and I think India में SMB भी enterprise की तरह ही deal करता है. So we were
enterprise pays like SMB and SMB behaves like enterprise.
I think for me that's the end of the day. So
in our minds, you're always selling to enterprise.
Let's say a year down the line where you have been, and this was, as Nikhil was speaking, I was thinking about it. For some reason, the model is not performing as well, right? At that point, what do you do, in the sense that, because I can imagine some customers will get jittery. There'll be somebody within a customer saying, what, I always said, AI very bakwas hai, why are we doing all of this? And now look, let's say some bad event happens at a customer end. Just any one, I don't know how frequently that happens. And then, what are ways to mitigate that?
Yeah, I think I completely resonate with that question, because when it comes to AI, I would put 2 parts to this. One is, how observable is your product? Can people really understand what's going on, or is it a black box? So sometimes AI is just like, like for example, something like ChatGPT. Again, I keep using that. It's so easy to utilize. You have no idea what's happening in the background, right? You put in a sentence and something spits out. If it doesn't give the right type of response, you don't really know what to do. You'll just type in something different. So when a customer sees that the automation percentage or whatever the outcome is not being reached, can you give them a window to understand why things are breaking? So for in our case, what we do is wherever like sentences fail or the system fails to understand what someone has written, we call it a low confidence kind of, there's a metric, which is a confidence threshold. And we make that very public to the customer. Every sentence that comes in, they can see the confidence threshold and they can see which sentences are like low in confidence. And then they have ability to understand, oh, I can add this to the training data ourselves. And what we have done is that part is this is a UI being built. So you know that, oh, I can add the data over there. So they have a little bit of control. And so they understand, oh, if I sit down, I look at all the data, I see where everything is failing, I can actually get this to work. So now there's no question that, oh, LimeChat is failing. Why? No, it's more about, okay, LimeChat is failing. Let's figure out what we can do to make it better. It's like, you not just put all the blame on them. So we make it very, we set that expectation with the client, number one. Whenever those outcomes go below a certain threshold, we sit down with them and we do an auditing together. We make it very clear that it's your responsibility as well as our responsibility. You know exactly what's happening. Let's fix it together. And that has worked so far. Like we've never had a problem across the board with this mentality so far.
Interesting. And I think what, to paraphrase, you were saying, make it explainable and also make it transparent to the customer.
Yeah. And is there some part of it that you can make it like, do it yourself? So for our case, the customer actually has the ability to add that data. They can see the mistakes, they can add it themselves, and they feel in control.
We would always make sure we set expectations that this is not a one and done. And, we almost treated it like as an opportunity. So we would sell this package of like tuning, maintenance. So you run a report, you show them in, monthly business review or quarterly business review. Okay, here is it. Have some alerts. So if something goes off, tell them. In fraud, it's a lot easier because fraudsters change patterns. So it's expected that you have to keep evolving.
Yeah.
But many different reasons why things could change, right? Your data fields changed or models deteriorate. So it's better to just set expectations saying this is going to happen. We do have a package. If you want, you can purchase that package. If you don't, you're on your own. It's like insurance, right? You don't buy it, that's fine. If things break, then you have to like pay to fix it, right? Enterprises, it usually works because people want a hassle-free, headache-free. They'll buy an insurance just to make sure that everything's taken care of. And we automated some of that with the SMB stuff. So it would auto print a report and you would get that at a click to say, okay, how much has changed in terms of tuning and all of that. But yeah, it does make, you do want to set expectations, especially because the salespeople have gone and sold things like the model trains itself. Right? It's like now you have to back out of that. It doesn't train. We need to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. Every once in a while, check in with the model. So setting expectations definitely helps.
Got it.
I love this concept of AI insurance. I think that's a whole field that can be built.
For enterprises, how do you build urgency? Because value is dependent on upfront integrations with the customer stack. In some sense, how do you just reduce the time to show that you are a must-have? Given anyway, there is going to be a fair bit of time in just getting the data, integrating, and so on. And I know, Rahul, you touched upon it at the start, that these connectors are making life slightly easier, but maybe just going one more level of depth here. And this is the question from Puneet. I
don't have any great thoughts there because, just think of it, right? Like, I'm sitting inside PayPal. Everything's working fine, right? So I don't lose my job if I don't change anything. So that mentality is there, right? Like, why bother? Unless there is like, oh, every one of my peers did something and now their performance is better and now I am on the hook. So usually it came down to timing. So if you're in the right, like, they had just started an RFP process, something. So like finding the customer at the right time if they weren't at the right time, no matter what you did, you're not going to expedite that sales cycle. So how do you find them at the right time? And the motivation is like quite high. that is the only way we found we could actually move things faster, right? Other than that, it was always 10 hurdles, 15 influencers, everybody has their say. You show up to a 20% meeting, you have to say something, right? So yeah, there's no magic, there's no silver bullet that at least I figured out to sort of shorten the sales cycle there.
With large scale projects like GPT, and by the way, this could be equally relevant to a Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 2 or whatever else. But would it be easier to launch applications today? So assume that somebody started 4 years back when these tools were not available. The knowledge that they have gained, the data that they have gained so far to, in a way, fine tune their AI, does that advantage become irrelevant or reduced as these large models, large foundational models are coming into being? And by the way, I got that comment from another entrepreneur yesterday who was trying to do it in the creative generation space for marketing. He said the same thing, that all the companies that I've been doing, it's again ground zero for everyone. So I'm not coming with a disadvantage, but would love to get your thoughts, and Nikhil might be even more relevant from your perspective.
Yeah, again, I think it's a very interesting question in this time frame. Like, I think it's a question that everyone should think about. Fundamentally, every couple of years we have that generational leap when technology just outdoes itself, and this is one of them. So what it does, it forces every company to reinvent itself. You have to understand how much of your business is going to be affected. Like in our case, we're in that same space. We're looking at conversational automation. Now, we have to understand, like, the magic of some of these applications, some of these models, is the fact they can do a lot of different things. But is that really required? So in our case, we have a very specific business outcomes that need to be reached. No one really cares. Our clients do not really care what is powering that business outcome, as long as that outcome is being achieved. So the nuances, how to think about your moat, how we think about our moat, is how nuanced are those edge cases that we have kind of built in that allow us to hit those outcomes. If without which, with just general intelligence, you miss out maybe 20%, right? Yeah. So our moat is not really the AI model then. Our moat is the edge cases that we've actually put into it, the insights that we have actually put into it to kind of reach those outcomes. So even right now, if you use ChatGPT, it could maybe do certain things a lot better. So imagine this. This is the metaphor I like to use. Without ChatGPT, and let's take a scale of 100% right now as 100% capability of solving a problem. Earlier, the models were pretty weak. So you only had off the bat, a normal model would have 30% efficiency of solving that problem. And you would do that verticalization. That's where all these verticalized AI companies came into being, right? And they would take it from 30% to 70%, and some cases 80%. Now, what ChatGPT has come, and it has shifted the bar from 30% to 60% for everyone. Everyone now can start at 60%. So now the race is going from 60 to 80. It's much easier. So a lot more people can enter into the market. So what this has done, it has basically established the fact that not only the hardcore researchers can harness this technology, it has become democratized. So does it really replace the current solutions? Not exactly, but does it increase the ability for newcomers to come and disrupt? Yes, because a lot more people have access to this technology and it's become more democratized.
Very well put. I don't know, Ketan, Rahul, any different thoughts on this question?
No, actually, I agree that probably, given that what Nikhil also said, that at least 60% of where aa gaya hai, so a lot more people can come in, and if the client expectation is low or relatively low because they are new, then the guy with the distribution might have a strong edge. So I think I tend to agree with that thought. जितना ज़्यादा आप मार्केट में जा सकते हो, जल्दी जा सकते हो, उतना better है.
Yeah, I'm just glad I'm not in the content business right now. Like content, it is shockingly good, right? Like I haven't used the previous versions, but literally from everything like reading code and giving you comments for the code back. Because like one of the things we use it for is like our engineers are very hesitant to write a lot of comments in the code. This writes it for them, right? Which is fantastic. So there is like, yeah, I don't I was trying to think, right? Like, let's say when Google came to search and everybody else went out, what did someone wanting to be in search had to do? Like some kind of vertical search, some kind of capabilities that were specific to hotels or like, local search or what have you. But you could not compete head on once that space was taken. So you have to find your niche, I guess. And you have to sort of double down and go from that 60 to 80 to 90, right? That's where you need to focus, not on the baseline is set. The baseline is now very high. What else can you do on top of it?
Understood. Rahul, by the way, I'm pretty sure it's not just your engineers who are hesitant to write comments.
Just on that comment, Rahul, we talked to a couple of people, and this is aside in some ways from the go-to-market topic, but they were arguing that if you look at the development process itself, today the organization in development is like a pyramid, right? There is a VP of engineering, then there are these and these, and there are sort of the coders. The hypothesis is that both for code writing, commenting, a lot of other tasks, the lower layers of the pyramid is what actually AI should be able to do. And therefore, you will actually have a top-heavy part of the pyramid that you actually need inside the organization. And the bottom part of it, actually, machines should be able to do. So I don't know that is if that is going to fundamentally change just the structure and the process of development in the first place. But I guess time will tell. Why don't we ask the last question, which is on the board here. Outside of the 3 companies that each of you run or have run, which are some of the other companies that you really respect or you think have done seminal work in onboarding their customers for an AI first application? Anything that comes to your mind?
Kind of all suck, otherwise I wouldn't be in this business. But I will say this, right? Having worked at PayPal, I just onboarded onto Stripe, and it was a delight, right? Like 5 seconds, my payments are up and running. Like such a delight to onboard onto a product. So it's not an AI, they're not pushing AI as such, but like the onboarding experience was fantastic. Self-service, I didn't need anything. It was intuitive, very delightful. But AI-wise, I haven't seen anything, at least in the tools that I use.
Just a follow-up question on that one, and I know we are going to run out of time pretty much with this. Given the importance in some sense of the onboarding function, right? Especially for an AI first company, do you think it makes, like, ultimately, where does it reside? Is it part of the GTM org, or is it part of the success org?
I think it all depends on, like, if you're trying to do a more generic platform, it might be a different answer than if you have a very point solution kind of use case. So, we'd have to parse the nuances there. But I do feel like there is so much context, like if it's actually like quite a heavy product, right? Like there is a little bit of a learning curve. And to throw someone in self-service, you would need a lot of like just spending time on onboarding. How do you onboard? What screen do you show? Which flow do you just get them to master first? And all, like it's literally like an education thing, right? Like you have to have somebody who's good at that to do that. Otherwise, you have to like actually train them and get them on. At least in our case, that's the case right now. Like if somebody says, "Oh, just give me the tool," I'm like, "No, you need to sit with me for an hour. I'll show you everything, and then you do it." Otherwise, like you're going to click something and like be lost. We try to sort of benchmark with known concepts, but it's still there's a learning curve.
Rahul, Nikhil, Ketan, and to everybody in the audience, thank you so much for taking the time and also for sharing your inputs.